Hello everyone, hope you're doing very well. My name is Azren, aka Azren the Language Nerd. That is how you can find me online. And today I'm going to be doing a short presentation discussing linguistic and behavioral patterns, and more importantly, why they matter for both language learners and language teachers. Now, before jumping into all that, I realize that most of you probably have no idea who the heck I am, and so here's a quick little introduction about me. So, like I said, my name is Azren the Language Nerd, or Azren is just my normal name, my name that my friends call me. And as my name implies, I love languages. Currently, I speak English, French, and Spanish at basically the same level. I also speak Gujarati at an intermediate level and Mandarin at an intermediate level. My current language focuses are on getting my Gujarati and my Mandarin to basically a near native to native level. My future language goals are to be able to add Arabic, Russian, and Hindi onto the current languages that I already speak. So essentially what I'm trying to do is by the time I turn 40 years old, so that gives me basically a 15-year runway, I'd like to be able to speak English, French, Spanish, Gujarati, Hindi, Mandarin, Russian, and what's the last one? Arabic. Those are the 8 languages that I'd like to speak at basically a near native, if not native level in the next 15 years. Outside of languages, I love traveling. Traveling is a big passion of mine. And currently I visited 115 cities across 15 different countries in the world. Now, what's interesting is that even though I am interested in increasing the number of cities and the number of countries that I visited, weirdly, or maybe not weirdly, but one thing I'm even more interested in doing is making sure that I spend a good chunk of time in every single region or a lot of the cities that I visit. Because I find that if you spend a significant portion of time or significant amount of time in a specific city or a specific region or a specific country, you can start to understand that culture and that linguistic group, let's say, at a much deeper level than if you just go there as a tourist. So, for example, I've spent 3 months in Beijing. I spent I spent about roughly 5 months in France. I've been to Peru. I lived in Peru for 2 months. I was in Chile for a month. Like, I'm trying to spend good chunks of time in the places that I visit because I love people. I love understanding how people think. I like understanding where they come from. I like understanding how specific cultures tend to view things in comparison to my culture. And in my perspective, understanding other people's points of view really leads to a sense of empathy and understanding of where others come from. So it's something that I'm quite passionate about, something that I'm very interested in. Also, you know, if we're looking at more on the family side of things, I'm closest with my mom and my sister. So my sister is 22 years old and she's disabled. She is, basically, you could look at it this way. She's 22, but her brain is developed at the level of a 2-year-old. And so I am actually her alternate guardian. And me and my sister, we are very close. My family, everyone basically, most of them live in Canada, which is where I live. However, my roots are actually from India. So, which is why I speak Gujarati, because Gujarati is a language that my family speaks. In terms of work, currently, since about, I would say, probably February, March of 2017, my full-time gig has been teaching various languages. So I teach English, I teach French, I teach Spanish. I'll even do some basic Mandarin. I will do it if someone asks me. But English, French, and Spanish are kind of the main things that I teach. However, for 6 years, believe it or not, I actually ran a window cleaning business. So it's funny is that the first, I guess we could say career that I really had, or first major work engagement that I had was something that was so distant from languages. I don't know. I find that to be an interesting part of my whole story. But yeah, I think that's enough introduction on me. Let's jump into the presentation or this topic of our topic of this video. Now, linguistic and behavioral patterns. It's funny, right? Because when people learn languages, I find that most people tend to focus all of their time on the language itself. things like grammar rules, things like pronunciation, things like the alphabet, things like, whatever, right? Different elements of language, vocabulary, different elements of the language, which obviously is very, 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 very important. You cannot learn a language if you don't focus on a lot of the different elements that exist in that language. However, what's interesting, and this is what fascinates me, is often I see people who speak a language very, very well. They've studied it for years, they know a lot of the grammar, they speak well, they sound good, they understand everything. And yet, what happens is that a native speaker doesn't look at them and consider the learner to be a native speaker. In other words, the native speaker doesn't look at you and go, I accept you as one of my own. You are viewed, in a way, this sounds negative, but you're viewed as an outsider to that language group and to that cultural group. And that's something that fascinates me, because myself, whenever I'm learning a language, I want to not only learn the language, but I want to be able to speak it in a way and act in a way, and basically I want to immerse myself in that linguistic group and that cultural group to such an extent that when I'm speaking to them, I want them to feel like, or I want them to almost forget that I'm not actually from their cultural background. Obviously, they're not going to completely forget, because maybe my skin tone gives me away, maybe I've got a little bit of an accent, maybe who the heck knows, right? You're never, I think it's almost impossible to be like 100% native if it's not your native language, but you can get pretty damn close. And so what happens is that, I'm fascinated by this whole topic, and I think this happens because a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people, they don't focus on internalizing and understanding behavioral patterns and linguistic patterns. Let's start on the behavioral pattern side of things. Behavioral patterns are basically, how do I explain this? If you look at different cultural groups, often there's certain gestures, there's certain actions, there's certain things that they do that are very specific, that belong to only that specific cultural group. For example, when I lived in China, I noticed that if you want to beckon someone over, if you want to say, hey, come here, they don't do come here. That's not their gesture. They do come here. They go palm down and they go this way, right? Versus where I live, we go this way. And so if you gesture to someone and say, hey, come here in China, I'm sure they'd understand, they'd hear, I'm basically positive they would understand what you're saying, but that's not technically the fully native way to do it, and they will notice it. Maybe it's subconsciously, but even when they notice that, immediately you're put into that category of outsider. And maybe, I think outsider has a bit of a negative connotation, so maybe that's not the right word, because I don't think it necessarily has to have a negative connotation, but it is true. You will be viewed as someone who's a little bit more of an outsider than an insider, if that makes sense. Another example, this is another Chinese example. In China, they count very differently than many countries in the world. Most countries, or at least in most countries I've been to, count like this. I don't know why I didn't count out loud, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right? They show on their fingers like that, right? China, they don't do that. They go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, obviously counting in Mandarin, right? But then 6 is like this. This is 6. Not this, not this, this is 6. And 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all of different gestures, right? 6, 7, you have 8, you have 9, you have 10 or 10. There's different gestures. And so if you are, I don't know, in a market, or you're gonna go buy something, maybe you're trying to buy 6 apples, right? And you gesture say, oh yeah, I want 6 apples. I'm sure probably the shopkeeper will understand, oh, 5 and 1, 6. They'll probably get it, right? Especially if you say 6 in Mandarin, they'll get it. But again, they'll notice, they'll be, oh, that's not what we do. They'll notice it. Outsider versus slightly more on the insider side of things, right? So there's so many of these, even like India. I'll give one last example. I know I'm going on a tangent. I'll give one last example. India, there's a specific head gesture that people do, which is like this. It's like the sideways, like this head bobble thing. And we don't do that in Canada. We don't, that's not done in a lot of, in my experience, really any countries in the world. I don't think they do that. It's something specific to India, I think. And so what happens that if you don't understand this head bobble, right, when you ask people a question and they go, that's their answer, you're like, you won't even understand. You're like, what does that mean? Is that yes? Is that no? Is that maybe? Is that I don't know, what the heck does that mean? You have to be able to understand. You have to be able to understand what this behavioral pattern, this behavioral tendency, you have to at least understand it so you can even just communicate effectively, because in India that's very, very common. And so what happens is that you have all these different behavioral patterns, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. Every country, every region has their own. And I'm a big believer in, at a minimum, understanding what these patterns are so you could recognize them. At a minimum, recognize. But even more, at least for me, when I'm learning languages, I try and imitate them. I try and internalize them into myself, which is why when I speak languages, you know, I get really, like, even in Mandarin that I'm not 100% fluent, I go into like complete Mandarin mode. Like if you ask me something in English when I'm speaking in Mandarin, I need to like unhinge my brain from Mandarin brain and switch it to English brain, because I have slightly different mannerisms in Chinese and Mandarin. I have different things that I do that I wouldn't do in English, where my brain is literally switched to Mandarin brain. It's completely, it's a little bit bonkers actually. So behavioral tendencies, very, very, very important. Behavioral patterns, very important. Now, what are linguistic patterns? Well, linguistic patterns are similar, but these are more things that are related to you know, more related to like, you know, so, for example, like a social script. I'll give you an example. I used to live in Peru, okay? In Peru, I used to go to markets and I used to go shopping for souvenirs relatively frequently. And I noticed very, very quickly that every time I'd go to markets, the conversations I had with the shopkeepers were basically the same every single time. They follow the same structure, the same social script, let's call it, right? I'd go in, they'd welcome me in, I'd ask how much something is, they'd tell me the price, and then, because I was a tourist, they gave me a price that was so freaking high that I had to say, that's too expensive. I want a lower price. Same pattern every single time. Always the same, always, always, always. You catch the social script, you catch this linguistic pattern, it helps you function a heck of a lot better, right? Or even I remember so clearly, so vividly, you know, every time I go shopping, they'd always say, I was like, pasa amigo, pasa amigo, amigo, pasa, right? And there's a specific like way of saying it, and those specific words they use basically means like, oh, come on in, friend, my friend, come on in, right? And you notice this, and it gives you this understanding that even though in English I might not refer to somebody as, hey friend, come on in, friend. That's not something I would say in English. But in Spanish, I heard it so often, I go, oh, that's a little bit more acceptable in this culture. Again, linguistical pattern, linguistical rule, linguistical aspect of the language that maybe in a classroom you never taught, maybe in the textbook you never taught, but it matters. You have to internalize that kind of thing. You have to, if you want to be considered as more of an insider than more of an outsider. That's kind of my perspective on this, right? And there's a lot of examples. Even like, we can go away from vocabulary examples. We can even look at things like, we can even look at things like, I guess we could say that the sound effects, the sound effects people use. And I think this is more linguistic. I think this would fall into this category. But like my grandpa, for example, I'm learning Gujarati with my grandpa because, like I said, my family speaks Gujarati and I'm trying to actively work on it. And if my grandpa wants to say no, or if my grandpa wants to like, if I did a mistake when I was writing something and he wants to be like, oh, that's not right, no, he makes a sound effect, which is like, it's like a click, right? Or like, oh no, wait, yeah, it's a click, right? Like a click. And I realized that, no, that's not something you do in English. If you ask me a question, I would like, you'd be like, what does that mean? But for my grandpa, and actually I've heard many Indian people do it, they do the sound, which means no. And it's funny, right? If you can, first of all, you have to be able to know that, to recognize it, and so you can understand it. But if you can internalize that, and you can start to use it and imitate that, you know, it's these types of things that allow other people to be like, oh wow, he's an insider, she's an insider, they get it, right? And obviously, I said it before, they're gonna know you're not a native speaker. Like that I think there's a certain level of that, which is normal. But I'm obsessed because I love people. I want to be close to you. I want to really understand your culture. And the only way you can do that is for them to view you as one of their own, in my perspective, right? It's one of the, maybe not the only way, but it's one very effective way in my experience. And so, you know, I noticed recently that I do this, like I just do it. No one's taught me to do that. I just do it. I look for these patterns. I'm listening for them. And almost to the point where, like if we look at, I don't know why I grabbed this pencil, but it's like if you look at me in classes, when I've taken language classes, often when I take them, even though I'm listening to what I'm being taught and I'm listening to what the textbook says, I'm listening to what the teacher's telling me, I'm trying to memorize the rules, all that stuff, I'm equally paying attention to how's the teacher acting? How are they behaving? What are the things that they're doing in their speech that they're not teaching us, but they're doing that I want to imitate? I noticed like in Spanish, like the D's, I didn't realize, no one taught me this, but the D's in Spanish are not the same as the D's in English. They're not the same. But I don't think I've ever had a Spanish teacher who ever actually specifically like really focused on that or really taught it. I just heard it over and over and over. I was like, that's different. That's different. I need to change this. I can't say like my classmates, like even my teacher, like she's saying it's the same. It's not the same. It's actually different. Or even like some people in Spanish, when it's an ADA ending, like that D gets almost swallowed in a lot of ways, right? It disappears, but you don't get taught that. You don't get taught. You have to notice it and then imitate it because you noticed it, right? So anyway, I do it naturally, but I know a lot of people don't. So what I'd highly recommend, if you're learning a language, we'll finish on this note, language learners, I highly, highly recommend you spend a certain percentage of your energy, not just on the language side of things, but also trying to notice patterns and behaviors, okay? Try and focus on it. Try to catch some. I know it's hard, it doesn't come naturally, but at least pay attention. Now that you're aware, pay attention to them if you can. Maybe even ask people about them. Maybe some people are very self-aware and they know about these patterns and they can help you out. Language teachers, I highly recommend you start to notice what kind of unconscious things are you doing that are very important to really understanding that language well, and make it a point to teach it to your students. Make it a point to do that. Make it a point to point it out, as funny as that sounds, right? Do it because your students will they will appreciate it, I think. So anyway, we'll wrap it up there. I don't know how this is going to be structured exactly on the conference site and everything, but if you have any questions about this, you are welcome to hit me up. To search Azren the Language Nerd, any platform, Instagram, Facebook, you name it, I'm there. Or at PolyglotAzren, either way, search either one, you'll find me. And yeah, happy to chat with you further, answer any questions you have. So cool, see you guys later. Bye. See you, bye.